Hello and welcome to Jason's Weird Reads. I'm Jason White, and this is, as I just said, Jason's Weird Reads. So, what am I talking about today? Well, I'm glad you asked, because October of 2024 marks the 1-year anniversary of the Jason's Weird Reads book club. And I've always regretted calling it the Jason's Weird Read book club, because I noticed that everyone else who has a book club named it something else entirely, and I was just like, hey, why didn't I do that? Anyways, moving forward here, I decided last year, because I got a new job, as I keep going on and on about. I went and got that new job, and I had a little bit more time, and I was able to read more, and that excited me. And so I decided to see what it would be like. My microphone's all messed up here. To see if I could create and sustain a book club. And so I went ahead and I created a book club, and it has about 100 members now, but out of those 100 members there's only maybe 5 that contribute continuously. So if you want to join a book club and you want to join my book club, the links are down there in the show notes. Go check it out. It's on the Fable app. I know that some people have struggled with the Fable app, and I'm thinking if anyone's interested of maybe expanding the book club into my Discord, because I have a Discord as well. The links for that are also in the show notes. All right, so I decided to start it, and it was pretty successful in my terms. I thought nobody would join, kind of like my Patreon. Yeah. So Patreon. That's down there too. Anyways, so, God damn it! Here, I'm moving this fucking thing. All right. There. So I decided to create one, and people joined right away, and we started talking about books, and that was my goal. I chose the first book because why not? And I'm going to get into the books that we read shortly, but I chose that first book, and then from there on, we voted on the books. And each month, we read a different book. And I have to admit, I didn't like them all. Not all of them went the way I wanted them to, the voting, but that's fine. I was introduced to books I otherwise would have never read, and some of those books I'm glad, or would have been glad to have never read. We'll get into that, though. There's only like 1 or 2 of them. So here we go with the books that we read during this whole year of the Jason's Weird Reads book club. And the first book we read, which I chose, was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This was a reread for me, and I believe I chose this because it's a great book to read during October. And I stand by that. It's a very good book. I listened to it on audio, and it's so well done. The audio narrator, who is the guy who plays the serial killer in Dexter, his name is escaping me, of course. It's Michael something, I think. But he's extraordinary. He's like almost the perfect fit for this book. He just has that sort of a voice that begs, I don't know, desperation maybe, sadness. So I really enjoyed reading Pet Sematary again, and so that was our first book. Second book we read was Devolution by Max Brooks. This was for, I remember I suggested this book, and I only suggested it because of the the cryptid readathon that we were doing the first year of, which was last year as well. See, I went and created a readathon as well, which was kind of insane, but here we are. Anyways, so yeah, I chose that, and I guess maybe because most of the people in the club then were watching my channel, they went with it as well, and we all read Devolution, and I remember this book quite well. It wasn't as good as I thought it would be, because everyone who's ever talked about Devolution really went on about how awesome it is, and I thought it was really good. I mean, it has a bit of a slow start. I remember some of the characters just going on and on about how beautiful the place they were staying was, and it kind of annoyed me. But once the action starts, it really doesn't turn around. It's a great book for that alone. There's quite a bit of violence, and it feels like a real book in a sense that this is sort of like found tapes or found footage type story in book form, and I really enjoyed it. The next book we read made my top 10 list, and pretty high up. I believe it was like number 2 for the books I read in 2023, and that's Blackmouth by Ronald Malfi. This book was for, I guess, December, and man, this book blew me away. It's very bleak and grim, and it has a lot of alcohol abuse. The main character is an alcoholic, and it doesn't make the alcoholism entertaining. It shows just how ugly it can be. The main character has a lot of things to do in order to heal, but the story is very much an ode to Stephen King's It. I find that a lot of people are saying that about some of Ronald Malfi's story or novels that have come out, but I think this is the only one that really felt like It to me, and it really feels like an ode to Stephen King's It. There's some similarities, but not too many. But while you're reading Blackmouth, you can't help but think of It by Stephen King if you read it, and that kind of impressed me because it doesn't really look like It, but it feels like It. And like I said, there are some similarities because you have the childhood story and then you have the adult story, but the monster or the creature or whatever is in this story is completely different. I loved it. The next book I struggled with that we read. I did not like this book, and I remember I think I messaged Rachel from Shades of Orange asking her if it was okay to DNF a club group read, because I kind of hated my experience reading this book. But after reading it, I found that I think about this book to this day. The reason why I struggled was what I felt was like an unnecessary, complex, almost antiquated language to the story, and that's The Reddening by Adam Neville. And like I said, I keep thinking about this story because there's some brutal, nasty things that happen in this story. It's quite incredible for that, but you have to be prepared, and I think I have to be in the mood to read Adam Neville. And maybe reading stuff like Adam Neville is not a good thing when winter is setting in, or it has already set in, because I'm sleepy and I'm kind of grumpy and I just don't want to deal with difficult stuff. Next up was another clunker for me. The Watchers by A.M. Shine won that round of voting, and this book I just did not like at all. I kind of like the second half more than the first half, but this book really, I did not first of all, I did not DNF The Reddening by Adam Neville. I decided to stick through it, and likewise I decided to stick through The Watchers as well. But both these books I probably would have DNF'd if it weren't for the book club. But like I said, where I kind of came around with The Reddening, I did not come around with The Watchers. I'm not even interested in watching the movie. The movie adaptation, I think, came out this year. I'm not sure, but it was just boring. The concept of being stuck in the woods because there's monsters surrounding you should be exciting, and it is just not. I did not like this story at all. I'm sorry if you did. If you did, that's great. Like, awesome. Like, there's a lot of people who like this book. I think I'm in the minority here, and I'm okay with that. Not everything is going to impress me, and so if you read it, I hope you enjoyed it. It just wasn't for me. Next up was another reread for me that won the voting, and that was The Fisherman by John Langan. Now, this story is a classic, and I have to admit that I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first time around. The first time around, it was just like blowing my mind every step of the way, and I think that's why. Because I knew what to expect, and so it just wasn't that, mind-blowing, oh my god, this is so awesome reaction. I was just along for the ride this time around, and it was a pleasant and very dark and twisted and weird ride that only John Langan can offer, and I absolutely adore this book still. I hope to reread it again sometime. The next one that won wasn't exactly a clunker for me, but I struggled with it nonetheless, and that was The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson. I just felt like the language was a little too complicated for what the story was. It's a crime story, but it has some supernatural elements. It involves like the swamp and the bog, and rivers and riverboats, and running drugs on these riverboats, and a young woman who's I'm not going to get into plot. I'm going to be going on too long with this stuff if I do that. But the language, it's very beautiful, but at the same time it's also kind of complicated. It's not always easy to follow, and it's not my favorite style anymore. I used to love books that had a complicated sort of prose to it. These days I prefer like more easy prose, and prose that sort of melts into your brain, I guess, if that makes sense. This is a good book, and it's written exceptionally well. It just feels like the language gets in its own way. That's what I said the first time I reviewed this book on this channel. It really feels like it's the language of this book gets in the way of the story. And if you're reading a book with beautiful prose, maybe shouldn't be thinking that way. Again, I think I'm in the minority here with that, but I'm not too sure. All right, next up, The Forgotten Island by David Sodergren, 1. And this one kind of divided the club a little bit. I think we lost a couple of members because of this book, honestly, because there were members who participated in every book until they read this one. And because I kind of praised it, there's at least 2 people I know who haven't come back. So they weren't impressed with like the continual essay that's going on within this story, and one of them even acknowledged that you could kind of tell that David Sodergren is doing this to show how evil it is, but they were still arguing that, and nobody argued. What I mean is their stance was that he didn't have to. Like, it didn't have to be part of the story. And, you know, it is kind of triggering, I think, because a lot of bad things do happen to women in these stories, but I felt that the women characters were a lot stronger, and especially in the end when they start fighting back against what's happening to them. So The Forgotten Island was quite the interesting read in the book club, and I had a lot of fun reading it. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's his best. It's his first, actually. I think his first published novel, which could be his first written one. I don't know. But I had a lot of fun reading it, and I have not been turned off by David Sodergren yet. I would highly recommend it, but you have to go in knowing that there's some if not some, a lot of essay. And also the creature. The creature is nasty, okay? The creature is also very original. And you don't see the creature until the end, but I loved it. That's what made my heart start to pound, and I was like, oh my god, this is great. All right, next up we read Every House is Haunted by Ian Rogers, and this is a collection of short stories, and I really enjoyed this collection of short stories. But the weird thing is this happens to me with short stories for some reason. It's even happening with Stephen King's You Like It Darker. I can't remember a lot of the stories. I think it's because I don't spend too much time with the stories, and if they don't make a huge impression on me, then it's just gonna go away. And that's pretty much what happened with these stories. I'm going to need to reread it, maybe. I enjoyed it. I just wish I could remember the stories a little bit better. And I also, speaking of You Like It Darker, I read this at the same time as You Like It Darker by Stephen King. And those stories, it's Stephen King, right? I've said this before. Like, he's a master, and this is a particularly particularly good collection for Stephen King, and so I shouldn't have read it at the same time. But I'd still recommend Every House is Haunted by Ian Rogers. The stories in here range. They're not all horror. They have different genres to them, but for the most part they're horror, and I remember them being interesting and fun. Next up, what won was Wild Spaces by S.L. Coney. We read this, and it's a very short book. I think the audiobook, which I listened to from my library app, was only about 2 hours long. So it's definitely novella length, and I was able to burn through it really quickly. And it was a pretty good story. I was hoping it would be a bit better than it were. I was hoping that I would enjoy it more than I did, but I still enjoyed it. And also, it's another one of those stories that's just sort of sliding out of my memory. I don't really remember too much about it. I remember a grandfather and a grandson, and one of them's not human, basically, and there's a dog. A dog is the main character, and there's tentacles. So that's what I remember. Cheers to Dr. Pepper Zero, by the way. Okay, so next up, we Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman won the voting, and I was happy that this won because this year I wanted to read more books that came, as they came out, more new release horror books, and I've pretty much failed at that goal. But this book is one of the ones I was able to read right away, and I really enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook on this one too, and the narrator does a fantastic job. I mean, she makes this book so much spookier than I think it would have been reading it, but I think just reading it would have been great as well. Next up, what won? This is the September read, and because the reading was so close, I mean that it tied for the first out of the first 4 books. It tied. These 2 books tied, and so I did another vote. And right up until the last couple hours of the voting poll time period, you only get 3 days to vote on the Fable app. It was neck to neck again, 50 to 50% each, and so I ended up, although Small Town Horror did end up winning, I ended up saying, hey club, how about we read both books anyway? I put up another poll asking if everyone was okay with that, and everyone was okay with that. They all voted 100% on that. So we read both the books, Small Town Horror by Ronald Malfi and The September House by Carissa Orlando. And I really enjoyed both books. Small Town Horror wasn't my favorite by Ronald Malfi. I've only read 3 of his books now. There's a possible 4th book that I read way back in like 2010, but I can't remember, so I'm not counting it. So I've read 3 books, but this is my least favorite by him. There's like some twists and turns that should have got me really excited in Small Town Horror, but didn't. When they came, I was like, oh yeah, okay. Instead of, oh my god, you know what I mean? So that makes a huge difference. It's like a book that should have really clicked but didn't for some reason, but it was still very enjoyable, and I would still recommend it, especially to Ronald Malfi fans. This is a good book. It's just not his best. The September House by Carissa Orlando is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the first half of it, but the second half kind of went down for me a little bit. A lot of the people in the book club really enjoyed this read through the whole way through, and that's absolutely perfectly fine. I enjoyed it, but I found that there was a red herring that comes about 3/4 of the way through the book that takes us till the ending, and to me it was kind of see-through, and it just felt like it was kind of tacked on. I don't know if it was tacked on or not, but it felt like it was tacked on, and I didn't like that. But I'm a journeyman when I read. I don't read the book, the ending. If I don't like the ending to a book, it's not going to ruin the journey to get there. And I may have lowered the star rating for this. I think I rated it 3.5 stars, but it wasn't because it's a bad book. It's just the ending just didn't impress me very much. But yeah, I will rate books down a little bit for a bad ending, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. The September House is a good book. It's just there's some stuff at the end that I didn't really enjoy very much. I think it should have just stayed where it was and kept going in that regard. That's just my opinion, though. And now we have come back to full circle here. We are back on October, and today we are reading Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Another Stephen King for October. I don't know if Stephen King is going to be a traditional thing for the Jason's Weird Reads book club. The October read has to be a Stephen King book. I wouldn't mind, honestly. I wouldn't mind reading more Stephen King throughout the year, too, in this book club. But yeah, Salem's Lot is an awesome book. It's another book that's really good to read around October. So that's what we're reading. I decided to put this out as a suggestion because because of the new HBO Max movie that was released, and a lot of people are hating this movie. Let me tell you, a lot of my friends on Facebook and Twitter, they're just ripping it to shreds. And I watched it the other night, and I don't think it's quite that bad. It's definitely not great. It's definitely not great, but it's not that bad. All right, so there we go. There's our. I think I'll do this again next year. If you want to join a book club again, links are down there to go sign up on the Fable app, and go there, and we'll discuss some books. All right, thank you for watching. Keep being creative and keep being weird, my friends. And most importantly, keep being creative. And I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.